Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Bosnia is facing its gravest constitutional crisis in years after an attempt by state police to arrest Milorad Dodik, president of Republika Srpska, was blocked by entity-level forces. Dodik, sentenced for not complying with a decision of Bosnia's High Court representative, remains defiant, stoking separatist tensions and undermining state institutions. Joining us to unpack these developments is Toby Vogel, co-founder of the Democratization Policy Council, to help us understand what's at stake for Bosnia, the region, and the international community. Mr. Vogel, thank you very much for taking the time and welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
So, tell us about the significance of Mr. Dodik's actions, the fact that he stood up to state police and he's still walking around free, even though he should be in jail.
Indeed. And every day that he is not in jail makes a mockery of the rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, makes a mockery of the international assistance that the country has been receiving for 30 years now since the end of the war, and is an open defiance, really, to the very existence of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a unified state. Now, I would not pay too much heed to what happened last night. This was not a terribly serious attempt to actually apprehend President Dodik. He was, intercepted by three unarmed, I understand, policemen from the state-level police. I think this was more of a trial balloon, or possibly a bit of a show. But the fact remains that Dodik is at large, and there is no prospect of apprehending him under current conditions, and that makes a mockery, really, of the rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So you don't think state police are going to try again?
That is very hard to tell. I would not rule it out, but the key ask that state police are making of the international community, and specifically of the European Union, is that European Union peacekeepers who have been deployed in the country for more than 20 years back them up. So their demand is, we are going to go in, we're going to arrest Dodik, who is being protected by his own bodyguards. It's quite a large force from the Republika Srpska Interior Ministry that are loyal to him personally. You need to be behind us and show some real force, because that is the only thing that would actually get Dodik's bodyguards to back down. The EU so far has proven unwilling to provide that backup. And unless something changes, I have a hard time seeing state police trying this again. But you never know. And a lot depends also on individual commanders, on individual units. Let's not forget that there are divided allegiances and there's patronage and so forth. So we cannot really necessarily treat the state-level authorities as a sort of unified force that will act in unison.
But surely, if things stay as you just described them, Mr. Vogel, Ms. Dodik's making a mockery, isn't he, of the judicial system in Bosnia? That could lead to a collapse in rule of law, couldn't it, altogether?
He absolutely is. I mean, since this first instance verdict a few weeks ago, he's traveled very openly to Belgrade in neighboring Serbia a couple of times, zipping with his armored convoy right through the state border without being stopped. He's traveled to Israel and he's traveled to Moscow. And that obviously is designed to show that he has impunity, to rub it in everyone's face, as it were, and to demonstrate that he is above the law. And as long as that's the case, I think, like I said before, every day that Dodik is at large chips away a tiny little bit at this idea of the rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the idea that nobody ought to be above the law. And that is political theater of the first order.
Do you think this could encourage other separatist leaders now to come forward and do something similar?
That's a very good question. I think in general, Milorad Dodik has been hoping for Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, and Putin to rush to his aid. That has not really happened. I think Dodik may well have overplayed his hand. So at the end of the day, this may actually prove to be a cautionary tale rather than encouragement for others. But it is true that as long as he remains at large and as long as he's able to just zip through the Bosnian state borders without anyone daring to stop him, that could well prove to be encouragement for other people in the region who may harbor similar ambitions.
Now, you mentioned a number of countries there. I mean, are there other countries that would benefit from this type of secessionist behavior and rhetoric? Obviously, we're thinking about Serbia and Russia primarily, but are there any others, and what do they have to gain?
I think you put it very well there. This is about secessionist rhetoric and behavior. It is not yet about secession as it is. What I mean by that is that this moment of instability, this protracted period of perceived instability, actually serves Dodik very well. It serves his sponsor, Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, very well, because it allows him to be the peacemaker, to be the reasonable person who reins in the likes of Dodik. And it serves pretty much everyone who is involved in this charade. Because this is a business model. This is not just about a single individual. This is about a particular constitutional setup in Bosnia and Herzegovina as a result or as a component of a peace agreement, the Dayton Peace Accords of 1995, that created these sort of semi-autonomous entities, Republika Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there is essentially no incentives to cooperate. So mobilizing your own voters, mobilizing your own constituencies, while really doling out jobs and money left and right, that is the essential business model. And so I'm not sure that Dodik would necessarily even benefit from actual secession. We all hope it won't come to that point, but the main deterrent to that is EUFOR, the EU peacekeeping force. And unfortunately, the EU has allowed this to drop way below operational strength for well above a dozen years or so, so that it would have to be tested whether it actually really is still a deterrent force today.
Right. Well, you talk about the EU peacekeeping force, and it's obviously inadequate for the current situation, and it lacks political will to actually do anything. Is there anything else that the EU or other players like the US, for example, is there anything that they can do to damp down the situation, the tensions?
I think there's a number of things that could be done. One thing, thankfully so far, it seems that President Trump has not yet really caught on to the Balkan situation. The policy seems to be largely on autopilot, pursued by sort of mid-level State Department officials, diplomats, and that's actually a very good thing right now. We know that the U.S. discouraged President or Prime Minister Orban of Hungary to rush to Dodik's aid on the day when he was convicted by the State Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We know that there have been similar consultations with neighboring Croatia. So the U.S. role so far has been positive. We don't know to what extent or how long this will remain the case. The European Union really ought to urgently reinforce EUFOR. It has started doing so for the last several months. There's been sort of steady reinforcements coming in. That is a step in the right direction, no doubt. But there needs to be unequivocal, very, very clear messages to Dodik, but also to his sponsors. So President Vučić of Serbia, Prime Minister Orban of Hungary, that secession steps, concrete steps towards secession will not be tolerated and will be met, if necessary, by force. Now, of course, that threat has to be credible. Otherwise, it is just empty words. And for it to be credible, EUFOR really needs urgent reinforcements.
Yes, and that seems fairly logical as a process. But there is a big risk involved, isn't there, Mr. Vogel, in terms of, would it bring, set other regions or countries in the region, have them up in arms and say, well, because Dodik calls the EU force occupiers, are there other countries that might say, well, hang on, the occupiers are attacking, our own people. They shouldn't be here in the first place.
I actually don't think so. I think a strong EUFOR presence across the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and specifically also in the town that links the two halves of Republika Srpska geographically, a town called Brčko, would actually have a calming effect. It would give Bosnians and Herzegovinians the space, the political space, the security space, the mental space, to think about the future, what kind of state they want to live in, what kind of social contract they want to strike, without secessionist threats, but also without the outsized influence of foreigners, be they European or American. So I do think that this is a bit of a Band-Aid. Eventually we can rip off that Band-Aid, but right now we still very much need it to be in place.
We need it for stability at the moment. Mr. Vogel, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.